It makes you wonder if you just fit a pitot tube in the real foils.
I guess I should do some sort of intro. So, INEOS. They have launched an LEQ 12 on just last week. We're here today looking through the first images of the boat, giving our initial reactions. Some kind of striking differences to the boats they've launched before, some similarities to the boats which are already on the water. Before we get into any of the techie stuff, what do you think about the appearance of the boat?
When I first saw it, I hated it. I thought it looked stupid, and then every time I've looked at it since, I actually look at it kind of feature by feature and think that actually makes a lot of sense.
I think in some ways it's super simple. It's really boxy. Why have they gone down that route? For me, the transom area looks a bit sticky, especially if you're in that marginal takeoff. Is that going to help them or not? It's difficult.
My initial reaction to it was that anything that comes out of INEOS's design house always looks a little bit boxy. Like, they're not afraid of a square edge, are they? Like,
pretty's not necessarily on the agenda.
Yeah, but the flip side is, I think one of the boxiest test boats last time was the Emirates Team New Zealand one, and that served a very good purpose. So yeah, whether it needs to be pretty or not, I'm not sure. But it would have been nice for them to just surprise us with a pretty boat. If it doesn't matter, then
it's not,
maybe it could have just not mattered and be pretty.
Or like big overhangs. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'd really get the waterline length up when they're heeled over.
Nice gold leaf around the gunnels kind of thing. I think the thing I find interesting on this boat is that, well, firstly, at least they've designed a bustle for it that is not bearing a striking resemblance to brick. Like, it looks like they actually understand how that's going to interact as they maybe skim waves while they're sailing along. That looks good. I think it's really intriguing that they haven't gone full length on that bustle. That everyone who did it in the last cycle brought that right up to the leading edge of the rudder.
Yeah.
So it's a very conscious thing. It's probably 1.5 meters short of the rudder.
It's a reasonable distance, isn't it?
Visually, the kind of the big marker that's different to what they had on their AC75 for the Cup is they've basically got this really wide, full box flat transom, which is what Emirates Team New Zealand had, and it's what Luna Rossa have got on their test boat, and it's what essentially it's a little bit more rounded on the AC40, but essentially it's like, so they've gone for that super flat lines at the back, and I guess that's kind of homage to Emirates Team New Zealand's boat, and that's how the back end really narrow, kind of slender back end. Right, let's talk about.
It's quite like a solo dinghy, I think, with those giants. It's really. I mean, I know they've modelled it. Maybe on a GP14, something like that.
Maybe part of the design brief was it must be able to be like made in a plywood kit.
Yeah.
Okay, style.
To be sold in all good British newspapers after the Cup.
Yeah.
Higher plans here.
So the interview with Ben Ainsley and the chatter around the boat is that it's not going to be the fastest LEQ 12. It's not meant to be the fastest boat they could make. It's meant to be about sensors and capturing data. What do you think about that, Rob? Because I know you've had a little look at the numerous sensors on the boat.
I think it's good to get your excuses in early, isn't it? No, I think this is really interesting, and I think this is a bit of the Mercedes F1 coming to the fore. It makes sense to just get a platform instrumented up as early in the cycle as possible, and then use that to collect as much good data as you can to validate your simulation tool. Because I think in reality, if you look at the split between simulator time and boat testing time, if the simulation tool is good, it's going to be way more efficient in terms of running iterations of kit without committing to building.
It's incredibly powerful and a cheap way of developing.
Yeah, and we know INEOS have teamed up with Amazon Web Services since the last cycle, so they're going to be able to throw a lot of brute force computing power at this. but you need those inputs at the beginning to make sure that what you're running is actually valuable. And this platform is really really focusing on that by the looks of it. I think the most obvious of the sensors are the pitot tubes on the front of the main foils, and so that they're effectively using the difference between static and dynamic pressure of the fluid to give them a speed reading. So you're going to get like, I don't know, 0.5% accuracy. So
It's just super high fidelity data all the time.
Because everyone else is relying on GPS speed, and that's actually and that's not very valuable if you're then comparing, a time synced image to an exact speed reading at that given point. You can't really trust the GPS if you're looking at I don't know, 30 frames a second or whatever.
Yeah. Well, first of all, GPS is a lagging indicator in that it's always your speed over the previous second rather than an instantaneous record. Second thing is, I know, anecdotally, they had their training campaign in the Solent and suffered miserably with the tide there and taking out the GPS data, even if it's like megahertz GPS data, separating out from the tide was just a complete nightmare.
Yeah.
They fitted that little sonar thing on the bottom. I'm not sure if it was sonar. I think it was sonar or some sort of or light. I'm not sure if it was sonar or light, but it fitted that in the bulb of their first boat, and it obviously gave them shit data because they never put in any of their equipment again. There was a bit of a press release about it, but then it's gone off the face of the earth. And I think that was a sensor that's used kind of like on work boats and stuff like that. It's like
just, not the same game.
Completely different. So I can see with the sensor they put on, they've kind of learned a lesson. But there's so many like other things like integrated into the boat quite nicely. Like all the cameras are well integrated, like within the foil, set within. Also there's a couple of cameras which are kind of integrated into the side of the boat, set in the nice like carbon mould, whereas the other teams are still look like they're sticking on GoPros and stuff like that.
Well, we saw that with INEOS in the last cycle, didn't we, when they had their foil issues and the Christmas regatta, and then they were literally just sticking GoPros onto the foils and getting quite useful data obviously from it because they did make a big improvement. They've clearly taken that forwards and gone, you are learning something from the GoPro, but it's also massively hampering the performance of that foil. So if you can integrate that camera, you're going to get good, real foil data, time synced your speed perfectly, and it's not affecting the result that you're getting effectively.
It is a real F1 influence, and you can kind of see the way that they've gone about that process. There's knowledge there as to how best to do it, and F1 is probably the best place for that currently in world sport, where the amount of data they've got and processing, and actually all the interactions aerodynamically. There's so much going on.
I think in the last cycle, it never really felt like INEOS had an edge on any of the teams, but actually when you compare their LEQ 12 launch to the Luna Rossa LEQ 12 launch, I'd say INEOS are like 1-0 up at the minute. They've made a really smart first move with this platform.
Guess it'd be good to bring in Tom as well about the forward design and what the shapes look like compared to, what we're accustomed to seeing on Luna Rossa's test boat, what's on the AC40, what we saw in the last cup.
Yeah, so the foils are quite almost boring. Really,
we had this exact conversation last time. We talked Reynolds numbers, we looked at all the planform areas, we looked at all the taper ratios and sweeps, and we just said, why are people making foil wings that don't look like glider wings or Spitfire wings? Like you look at the Reynolds numbers, and these are the Reynolds numbers the boats do. So
and they've gone back to basics, and there is a defined formula to what makes an efficient wing, and that is an elliptically loaded planform, and that's what they've gone for. And you say a Spitfire wing. If you take a look at a Spitfire wing, it's pretty similar. You've got elliptical taper on the leading and trailing edge, and in terms of where Ben says it's a good platform to collect data, it's a simple tool to validate. You haven't got winglets interacting. or you could add winglets on to it and see how that changes. They've got quite a high flap ratio, so the flap's quite a high percentage of the chord. Not quite 50%, but it's right up there. So suggesting that they could maybe go for a less aggressive overall airfoil section, but use the flap to generate that extra lift at takeoff. And that could be designed around like cavitation and those limits that they will be trying to push the cavitation level as high as possible.
What do you think about having the same foil on both sides? Is that a missed opportunity to do A/B testing? Because in the last Cup, so much was made of that, and in the last Cup, INEOS launched with the same foil on both sides, and then I think it was Luna Rossa were the first boat to launch with different foils on each side. Everyone was like, "Oh, that's so obvious!" It became a massive thing. Like everyone was running like a sequence of like A/B tests, and yeah, INEOS, on the face of it, have made the same mistake they made last time by using the same foil on both sides on their first boat.
It feels funny that they haven't gone.
No, I think it makes total sense. You know, look at the history of the America's Cup. Models, you know, theoretical models for predicting performance of your boat were in the really early days. The best way to compare performance and learn was to go out and two-boat tune and try one thing versus the next. And if you have no way of comparing A to B other than building the thing and then running it, then yeah, do A/B testing on the boat. But these guys are taking the F1 approach. They want maximum amount of time validating their simulator as early in the cycle as possible. Because if you put two different foils on the boat, well, you've got the lead times. How quickly can you change those? How quickly can you actually make progressions? Whereas in a simulator, you can literally run thousands of iterations in the time that you would learn a little bit about one foil in the real world.
They might be different sections. We can't
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah.
So actually, they could have exactly the same plan form, yet they're running two different airfoil sections. And actually, maybe they've done that.
Yeah,
That is a smart,
subtle change rather than the big one.
Yeah.
But also it could just be the same foil on both sides, and it's about testing the testing equipment.
Yeah.
You know, collecting more validation data, but also making sure that, you know, if you're doing A/B testing, you're never really sure. You know, if you're making more leeway in one tack, is it a little bit of ties? Is it the foil? Is it, you know, there's so many variables.
Yeah.
Whereas if you start off with everything identical, then you can hone in your sensors and you know what's what, and then you can start changing stuff.
And also, you stop worrying about which side's quicker or not. So you're just sailing everything true.
And it's going to be really telling though. This is that trust between your design team and your sailing team. If you put two different things on there and you get a sailing team who start kind of having an opinion on different bits of kit, that might be valuable, but it might also send you along routes that are not that beneficial in the long run. But at least with this, you know, it's just gather the data, you guys sail the boat, we're going to do the analysis, and off the back of this, we're going to come up with a solution that will be optimal.
I actually think that they've not tried to be too clever. They've gone for relatively simple solutions, which probably are not going to be bad. And ultimately, this isn't about necessarily being, repeating what Ben says, being the fastest. It's actually about producing the best test model.
Mm-hmm. And these boats are never going to race.
Yeah.
Like, this boat's never going to line up against anyone other than INEOS's own AC40 when they get it. They might not even line them up because
Pointless.
it's pointless. Because well, also, if you line up your 40 and your
LEQ 12.
LEQ12s catchy, well, who's in their sailing team?
Yeah.
Like, does one boat just win because the sailors are better? Then you start thinking a whole load more variables in the mix that you can't really account for. It just clouds the data almost.
I think one thing that seems to be common across the board is that they're mounting the foils, the forward foils, as far aft on the arms as possible, and the rudders as far forward, closing up that gap between the two foils. That seems to be that's a common.
I think we talked about this last time. They want pitch instability. They want to be able to generate as much downforce through the rudder as possible. Like they're using that as a writing moment tool as soon as the boat's up to speed.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things on this above the waterline which I quite like as reasonably novel things, although I've had it point out to me one of them's not novel at all. It's on an International 14. But the first of all is just seeing as the jib tracks just flick up on the pictures behind the camera. That is something that in the last cup always struck me, that no one had any adjustment on their jib clue board, like a hydraulic adjustment, so they could change the clue adjustment as they go along. So basically they were hooking into a hole on a clue board, and that was them set for race, which is, you know, what you do in your 29er or your RS800 or 49er, but it wouldn't be something I think you do on America's Cup boat. And even like a cruising yacht has quite a lot of adjustment on the fly of their sheeting angles. Now obviously with a tacking jib, you can't adjust that in the same way, and it does create a little bit of a problem in terms of, if you want to adjust your sheeting angle, you either do it on the clue where you've got a bit of space, but if you adjust it on the deck, well, the deck is where you've got a car sliding. So what they've done on this boat, they've got two cars there. You can see one set up basically in line with the general sheeting angle, and that'll probably take the jib sheet load. And then you've got a second car just in front of it, which will probably be like a not sure what you'd call it,
like a tweaker,
like a tweaker line, to pull it down, and that'll change whether they're pulling the foot, flattening the foot, twisting off the jib, or whether they're pulling on more leech tension. And that's really important, because when you saw them blow the jibs in the last cup, the sheeting angle actually changes as you ease the jib. So the first bit of ease of the jib, it's just, you know, putting bag into the leech, opening up the leech, and then as you ease further, it puts more and more depth into the foot, and you get this kind of weird kind of like shifting of the sail shape as you ease, whereas having that tweaker line on it means you can actually have some combination where the actual shape chain stays roughly the same, the leech tension stays the same, but you can actually just ease.
I think it'd be good for the upwind downwinds. I know they're still doing like 30 degrees apparent on the downwinds, but they're not doing 15 degrees apparent.
It is different. Yeah,
so it'll help them deepen up the foot. I think in reality your upwind trim is probably going to be governed by, you can probably raise the jib up and down a tiny bit on the forestay, and I mean your clue is going to be super close to that car. It's not.
Yeah.
I think that's when you look at the American Magic jib with that massive clue board on it. You know, that won't be the solution that these guys are carrying forward into the. No one will be doing that because it looks super draggy and
One
heavy.
thing I did see on the American Magic photos, I'll spice them in, is their jib trim looked horrendous on the first boat. They looked like they couldn't actually trim in the top third of their jib. Even when they were like winched down to the deck, and the tack on the deck as well, it was just blowing out, and that shows like the problem you have, because you're so close with a deck sweeping jib to it that you don't actually have much room for adjustment if it's not spot on perfect.
Yeah.
So having that second car does give you that a little bit more.
I think the other nice benefit of it is that if you sheet into a clue board, as you move the sheet along that clue board, you're starting to put like leverage into the board, and these jibs and the sheeting loads are going to be pretty high. Like if you're going upwind at 35 knots in 20 knots of breeze, like that's a lot of load on the clue, and if you can be sheeting into a single point, you then build all the structure in your jib to radiate from that point, so you don't get any of this distortion of the shape via the lever of the clue board.
But something you said has been done on 14s, or tried on 14s.
Not the double jib track, but they've got two jib sheeting attachments, so you've basically got two lines.
Yeah.
And yeah, they move. You can move them or set them up independently.
Okay. Then the second thing I like above deck, which wasn't really covered in any photos, but then a little bit of this footage afterwards, is them stepping what looks like to be a surrogate mast or a towing mast. So now we've not seen it on the water, so we don't know this for certain. It could just be a mast they're putting in the boat to then stress test the boat. But that's an unusual thing to do. Normally what you do if you want to stress test the boat is flip it upside down, step it on a mast ball, and then load up all the kind of stays pulling down on the boat. And it's weird to stress test it, obviously, with a mast up and the boat on its cradle, because then that wrecks all the readings you're getting if it's sat in a cradle. So I think this mast must be a tow mast, like what we saw when Emirates Team New Zealand were just inventing foiling.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you can actually tow the boat from its centre of effort in the sail plan get foiling on just one foil, rather than all the tow testing we've seen so far is 2 foils. And one hint that Ben maybe dropped at this was he was like, we'll be doing a lot more tow testing than other teams. You can't...
Sure, once that's all done, tow testing I guess is next. How much of that will you do?
Yeah, we'll do quite a bit of tow testing. I think more tow testing than we've seen the other teams do.
Can't do tank testing, you're not allowed to do that, but they can't stop you doing tow testing.
Which is, and basically all they're doing is using a rib as your towing tank.
Yeah.
And that's how you set up towing tanks in a similar way. You have a mast that goes into a position on the boat, and then you set that mast position up to match your propulsive like forces and the direction of those. So actually that's quite novel and a smart solution. If they can do tow testing on one foil.
Yeah, no one else. I think the other thing is, even in a tank test, it's very hard to set up a wave angle that is at some kind of angle to the carriage. Like you basically run the waves straight down the tank, unless you go to somewhere like the ocean basin, but then you don't have the carriage capability.
But then you're in a free flow model.
Whereas you can actually just drive the rib at angles to the sea state that you know you'll be experiencing in upwind downwind racing.
Yeah, really interesting.
Just have a barge.
Just have a barge.
Just a barge with foils off it. You just tow around.
We might see that, like American Magic and Alinghi, they are still able to launch an LEQ-12. Can't say it. Terrible thing. They're yet to launch it. It'd be hilarious if they just launched like a tow model.
Box. Yeah.
But American Magic's first boat was quite like a barge with that scow bow in the last cycle, so maybe they'll really go for it.
So anyway, some really interesting things from INEOS on this test boat, I think. And I tell you what is fantastic about this is how much better it looks than that Quant whatever that they stuck foils on, and looked like an absolute death trap. I can't even believe they sailed that thing. Like, it looks like, you know, when you put like an asymmetric spinnaker on your topper and like...
Which everyone does.
Everyone does. It did look like a real kind of like...
Well, it was so it had to have stabilisers, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean... Well, obviously, both the LEQ-12s that have come out look like so much better.
Slick.
Like, people have a good idea for how to make these boats now, which is obviously a bit of a step up, and we're seeing, you know, obviously a little bit more thought behind it rather than just a proof of concept, which effectively that Quant thing with foils on was just a proof of concept that you could have a foiling monohull. You know.
Yeah, that it even worked.
Yeah.
And I think the 40's cooler though. The fact that if you have like $2 million sitting around, you can literally order one and have it.
Yeah, people have asked like, "Oh, what's the deal with Mozzy Cells coming back?" Basically, like,
we're going
to get one of those.
Well, the three of us. We need one rich person who.
So you watch Mozzy Cells and you're sick of doing J70s, whatever.
Who's helming on port? I'll take port.
Okay, I'll take starboard.
Okay.
Then. Obviously, Tom can't help.
Yeah. Not safely, anyway.
Right. On that note, we'll leave you be. But yeah, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Rob and Tom. And yeah, catch us in the future for a few more discussions around AC tech and just chit chat as well.